I walked into that courtroom wearing the only decent suit I owned, and my mother rolled her eyes like she always did when she looked at me. Patricia whispered something to my father, Douglas, and they both smirked. Their expensive lawyer adjusted his tie, looking confident. But when Judge Harrison glanced up from the case file and saw my face, he froze completely. His expression shifted from routine boredom to absolute shock. He looked at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. 3 times. Finally, he spoke, his voice uncertain and confused. "Wait," he said slowly. "The charges are against you, Mr. Nathaniel." He trailed off, stunned. My parents looked confused. They had no idea who their son really was. That moment in the courtroom happened 3 months after everything fell apart. But to understand how I got there, you need to know where I came from. I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White columns, manicured lawn, 3-car garage. My parents were both corporate lawyers at prestigious firms in Manhattan. They made excellent money, wore expensive clothes, and cared deeply about appearances. What they didn't care about was me. From the time I was 5 years old, I was essentially invisible to them. They sent me to boarding schools, not for the education, but to get me out of the house. Every birthday passed without a card. Every school play, every science fair, every graduation happened without them in the audience. My younger sister Carolyn was different. She got piano lessons, dance recitals, their undivided attention. I never understood why they treated us so differently. Maybe I reminded them of someone they didn't like. Maybe they just didn't have enough love for 2 children. Either way, by the time I was 12, I stopped expecting anything from them. I remember my 10th birthday clearly. They promised they would come to the school, take me out for dinner, spend the day with me. I waited in the lobby for 6 hours. The headmaster finally told me they had called. Carolyn had a dance recital that night, and they couldn't miss it. That was the moment I understood the truth. I would always be the boy they forgot to love. But there was one person who did care. My grandfather Samuel. He was my father's dad, a self-made millionaire who built a construction empire from absolutely nothing. He started as a day laborer at 18, saved every penny, bought his first property at 25, and never stopped working. By the time I knew him, he owned one of the largest construction companies in Connecticut. He had money, respect, and a reputation for absolute integrity. Samuel saw through my parents immediately. He called them empty suits who married for connections rather than love. He was disappointed that his son Douglas had become so shallow, so obsessed with status and appearances. But he never gave up on me. Every month, without fail, he drove 2 hours to my boarding school and took me out for the day. We would go to construction sites, and he would teach me about the business, how to read blueprints, how to manage workers, how to build something that lasts. But mostly, he taught me about values, hard work, honesty, treating people with respect, regardless of their bank account. Samuel died suddenly 3 months ago. Heart attack in his sleep. He was 82 years old. I got the call at 3 in the morning and drove straight to the hospital. I held his hand, even though he was already gone. My parents showed up 2 hours later, already dressed in black, already discussing funeral arrangements and the estate. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people came. Employees who had worked for him for decades, business partners, community leaders. My parents put on an elaborate show of grief, crying loudly, accepting condolences. I sat in the back and mourned the only person who had ever truly loved me. The will reading happened a week later in the office of Samuel's attorney, Mr. Brennan, a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. The entire family gathered. My parents sat front and center, already looking like they owned the place. Carolyn fidgeted next to them. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the other chairs. Everyone expected Samuel's entire estate to go to Douglas. He was the only child, after all. The estate was worth $12 million. $2 million in the Greenwich house alone. $8 million in the construction company. Another $2 million in investment portfolios. Mr. Brennan opened the will and began reading in his steady, professional voice. Everyone leaned forward. Then he got to the distribution section. I leave my entire estate, including all property, business interests, and financial assets, to my grandson Nathaniel. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Hevel of 7-8. Brennan continued reading the specific clause Samuel had written. To my grandson Nathaniel, the only one who ever gave a damn about me as a person rather than a wallet, may he use this to build something meaningful. The room erupted. Patricia literally screamed, a high-pitched shriek that hurt my ears. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. Douglas's face turned purple, veins bulging in his forehead. Carolyn burst into tears. Aunts and uncles started shouting over each other. Mr. Brennan remained calm, having clearly expected this reaction. He explained that the will was ironclad, that Samuel was of completely sound mind when he wrote it, that it had been reviewed by multiple attorneys, and that there were no grounds for contest. Patricia suddenly switched tactics. Her face transformed from rage to sweetness in an instant. She rushed over to me, tried to hug me. Sweetheart, she cooed, her voice dripping with fake affection. This is wonderful news. But it's such a big responsibility. We should manage this together, as a family. Her eyes were cold and calculating. Douglas nodded vigorously. Your mother's right, son. Family takes care of each other. We'll help you handle this. For the first time in my life, I looked my mother directly in the eyes and said no. Just that one word. No. Then I stood up and walked out while they were still shouting. I heard Douglas yell behind me as I reached the parking lot. You're going to regret this, son. Family takes care of family. It wasn't a promise. It was a threat. The next 2 weeks were hell. My phone rang constantly. Texts poured in every few minutes. Emails filled my inbox. All from family members I barely knew, all saying the same thing. I was being selfish. I was ungrateful. I was tearing the family apart. How could I do this to my poor parents? My mother called me 63 times in 4 days. When I didn't answer, she started showing up at my apartment at all hours. 7 in the morning, 11 at night, 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford, 20 minutes from Fairfield. I worked as a project manager at a small architectural firm, making decent money but nothing extravagant. I hadn't touched the inheritance yet. I was still consulting with Mr. Brennan about the proper legal steps to take control of the estate. I wanted to honor Samuel's legacy, maybe expand the construction business, create something he would have been proud of. But first, I needed to get my parents to leave me alone. Patricia would knock on my door for 30 minutes straight, calling through the wood. Nathaniel, please. I just want to talk. I'm your mother. You can't ignore me forever. When I didn't answer, she would sit in the hallway and cry loudly enough for my neighbors to hear. Douglas tried a different approach. He would leave voicemails using his lawyer voice, stern and authoritative. This is unacceptable behavior. I'm your father. You owe me respect. Call me back immediately. Carolyn sent long text messages about how I was destroying the family, how Mom and Dad were suffering. How could I be so cruel? Extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years called to lecture me. My Aunt Martha cornered me in the grocery store parking lot and spent 20 minutes yelling about my ingratitude. My cousin Brad sent emails detailing how much my parents had sacrificed for me, conveniently forgetting that they had ignored me my entire childhood. After 2 weeks, I blocked their numbers. All of them. I needed peace, needed space to grieve Samuel, and figure out my next steps. That's when things escalated. They started a smear campaign. Subtle at first. Vague posts on social media about elder abuse and stolen inheritances. Nothing mentioning names, but their friends knew exactly what they were talking about. Then it became more direct. They told extended family members that I had manipulated Samuel when he was senile, that I had isolated him from everyone who loved him, that I had essentially brainwashed a vulnerable old man. None of it was true, but people believed them. Why wouldn't they? Patricia and Douglas were respectable lawyers with decades of standing in the community. I was just their weird son who nobody really knew. I started getting confronted in public. Three cousins I barely recognized approached me at a coffee shop near my office. They surrounded my table and demanded to know why I was stealing from the family. One of them called me a parasite. Another said I should be ashamed. The barista had to threaten to call the police before they left. A few days later, my Aunt Martha actually spat at me outside a Whole Foods. She stood there, her face twisted with disgust, and spat directly at my feet before walking away. Then the vandalism started. I came home from work one evening to find my apartment door scratched deeply with keys. Someone had carved lines all across the wood. My landlord was furious, said I would have to pay for the damage. 2 days later, I walked out to my car and found the word thief spray painted across the driver's side in bright red letters. The paint had been there long enough to dry completely. I had to pay $600 to get it repainted. The threatening letters came next. Plain white envelopes with no return address, delivered to my mailbox. The first one had a single sentence: "Thieves get what they deserve." The second one included a photo of me leaving my office building. Someone had been following me, watching me. The third letter detailed my daily routine with disturbing accuracy. The time I left for work, where I bought coffee, which gym I went to. I took all the letters to the police, but they said without direct threats of violence, there wasn't much they could do. My boss received an anonymous phone call claiming I was embezzling from the company. The accusation was completely false, but it triggered an internal audit. I had to sit through 3 days of interviews while the accounting department reviewed every expense report I had ever filed. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the whole experience was humiliating. My landlord got a similar call, someone claiming I was dealing drugs out of my apartment. Again, completely false, but it poisoned the relationship. He started watching me suspiciously, making surprise inspections. The harassment consumed my life. I couldn't sleep. I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks. My hands shook constantly from stress, but I refused to give in. This was what Samuel wanted. He had trusted me with his legacy, and I wouldn't let my parents bully me into surrendering it. Then came the night that broke something inside me. I was having dinner with Amy, my girlfriend of 14 months. She was a kindergarten teacher, sweet and patient and understanding. We had been getting serious, talking about moving in together. I had taken her to a nice Italian restaurant in downtown Stamford, trying to have one normal evening away from the chaos. We were halfway through our meal when Patricia and Douglas walked in. I don't know if they followed us, or if it was a horrible coincidence. They marched straight to our table. Patricia's face was red with rage. Douglas's jaw was clenched tight. Before I could say anything, my mother started screaming. The entire restaurant went silent. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "How dare you sit here enjoying yourself while you destroy this family? That money belongs to us. Samuel was our father. You manipulated him. You lied to him. You stole from us." She was so loud, spit flying from her mouth. Douglas grabbed my shirt collar and yanked me halfway out of my chair. "You ungrateful little bastard." After everything we gave you, I pulled away from him, trying to stay calm. "You need to leave. Now." Patricia reached across the table and slapped me. Hard. The crack echoed through the silent restaurant. My cheek burned. Amy gasped. Other diners were already pulling out their phones, recording everything. Douglas shoved me, and I stumbled backward into another table. The restaurant manager rushed over, shouting that he was calling the police. Suddenly, my parents' demeanor changed completely. Patricia straightened her clothes, her face becoming calm and concerned. Douglas let go of my shirt and stepped back, hands raised innocently. By the time the police arrived 5 minutes later, they were sitting calmly at a nearby table, looking like the victims. The officers took statements from everyone. My parents claimed I had attacked them first, that they had only been defending themselves. The manager and several witnesses contradicted them, but the police didn't arrest anyone. They filed a report and told us all to stay away from each other. The damage was already done. Amy drove me home in silence. At my apartment door, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I can't do this, Nathaniel. I'm sorry. This is too much drama. Your family is crazy, and I can't be part of this." She kissed my cheek and left. I stood in my doorway, alone, my face still burning from my mother's slap. The next morning, an envelope arrived via certified mail. I signed for it with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents, thick and official. My parents were suing me for the entire $12 million inheritance. The lawsuit claimed undue influence, elder abuse, and mental incompetence of the testator. They were demanding every penny Samuel had left me, plus additional damages. They had hired Whitmore and Associates, the most ruthless and expensive law firm in Connecticut. The fight had officially begun. I sat in Mr. Brennan's office 3 days later, the lawsuit spread across his mahogany desk. It was 147 pages long. I had tried to read it myself, but couldn't get past the first 10 pages without feeling sick. The accusations were so detailed, so specific, so completely fabricated, that I didn't know where to begin defending myself. Mr. Brennan, wearing his reading glasses low on his nose, flipped through the pages with a deep frown. "This is highly unusual," he said quietly. "This level of detail, this many specific allegations. Someone spent months preparing this case." He looked up at me. "Nathaniel, I need you to understand something. Your parents started building this lawsuit before Samuel died." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "These incidents they describe, these supposed witnesses they've lined up, the medical documentation they claim to have. This doesn't get assembled in 3 weeks. They've been planning this for at least 6 months, maybe longer." He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I'm an estate attorney, not a litigator. You need someone who specializes in this kind of fight." He referred me to Rachel Torres, a litigator in her mid-40s, with a reputation for being tough and thorough. Her office was smaller than I expected, but her credentials covered an entire wall. She had been practicing for 22 years, specializing in estate disputes and fraud cases. When I met with her that afternoon, she spent 3 hours reviewing the lawsuit while I sat across from her desk, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to panic. Finally, she looked up. Her dark eyes were serious. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Nathaniel. This is bad. They've built a very compelling narrative. A neglected son who suddenly reappears, befriends a wealthy elderly man, isolates him from his family, and convinces him to change his will. To a jury, that story makes sense. But it's all lies," I said, my voice cracking. "Every word is a lie." "I believe you," Rachel said. "But belief isn't evidence. We need to prove it's lies. And that's going to be difficult." She tapped the lawsuit. "They're claiming they have witnesses. Former employees of your grandfather's company who will testify you were abusive to him. A nurse who supposedly cared for him who says he seemed confused and frightened. A neighbor who claims she heard arguments. Medical records showing dementia. Each of these pieces makes their case stronger. Samuel didn't have dementia. He was sharp until the day he died. Then we'll need to prove that. We'll subpoena his actual medical records, get expert testimony, interview his real doctors. But Nathaniel, understand this. Your parents have unlimited resources. They're both lawyers themselves. They know how to work the system. This is going to be a long, expensive, brutal fight." I used $30,000 from the inheritance to pay Rachel's retainer. The discovery phase began immediately. My parents' legal team, led by a shark named Gerald Whitmore, requested everything. Every email I had ever sent to Samuel. 5 years of phone records. My complete financial history, to prove I didn't benefit before the will. My medical records, my employment records, character references from anyone who knew me. I complied with everything, because I had nothing to hide. Then their witnesses started appearing. First came 3 former employees of Samuel's construction company. In sworn affidavits, they claimed they had witnessed me verbally abusing Samuel, making him cry, threatening him if he didn't do what I wanted. The accusations made me physically ill. I had never raised my voice to Samuel once in my entire life. Rachel investigated these men. She discovered that all 3 had been fired by Samuel years ago for various infractions. One had been caught stealing equipment. Another had falsified timesheets. The third had gotten drunk on a job site and nearly caused a serious accident. They all had grudges against Samuel, and apparently had been paid by my parents to lie. Next came a nurse named Diane Fletcher. Her affidavit stated that she had cared for Samuel in his final months, and that he had seemed increasingly confused and afraid. She claimed I prevented her from reporting his deteriorating mental state. The problem was that Samuel never had a home nurse. He was completely independent until the day he died. When Rachel tried to verify Diane Fletcher's nursing credentials, she discovered the woman had lost her license 3 years ago for prescription drug theft. A neighbor, supposedly a woman named Margaret Chen, who lived next door to Samuel, provided an affidavit claiming she heard shouting and arguments coming from Samuel's house whenever I visited. Rachel drove to Greenwich and spoke to Samuel's actual neighbors. Nobody named Margaret Chen lived on that street. The house next to Samuel's was owned by a young couple with twin babies. They had never heard any arguments. Every single witness was fabricated or paid off. But proving that would take months of investigation and cost thousands of dollars. In the meantime, the lies were officially part of the court record. Then came the medical evidence that nearly destroyed me. My parents submitted reports from a doctor named Robert Hutchinson, a neurologist at Yale New Haven Hospital. The reports were dated 6 months before Samuel died. They detailed multiple appointments where Samuel exhibited clear signs of advanced dementia. Confusion, memory loss, inability to recognize family members, poor judgment. The reports concluded that Samuel lacked the mental capacity to make sound financial decisions. I knew it was impossible. Samuel and I had lunch together 8 months ago. He was completely lucid, talking about expanding into commercial development, showing me blueprints, making jokes. But this was a real doctor, from a prestigious hospital, with seemingly legitimate medical reports. Rachel subpoenaed Samuel's actual medical records from his primary care physician. They showed he was in excellent health for his age, no cognitive decline, no neurological issues. His doctor, who had treated him for 15 years, was appalled by the fabricated reports. But proving they were forgeries would require expert analysis, handwriting specialists, maybe even a criminal investigation. All of that took time we didn't have. While the lawsuit ground forward, my parents filed an emergency injunction. They argued that I was liquidating assets, moving money offshore, trying to hide the inheritance. All completely false, but it didn't matter. A judge granted a temporary asset freeze pending a full investigation. Suddenly, I couldn't access the $12 million, couldn't sell the house to cover legal fees, couldn't touch the investment accounts. I was locked out of everything Samuel had left me. My modest salary of $58,000 a year barely covered my own expenses. Rachel's fees were eating through the retainer fast. I was going to run out of money long before we got to trial. The stress was crushing me. I stopped sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night. My weight dropped to 153 pounds on my 5'10" frame. I looked skeletal. My hands trembled constantly. I started having panic attacks, my chest tightening until I couldn't breathe. My friends gradually disappeared. Nobody wanted to be associated with the drama. Coworkers avoided me in the office. The tension became unbearable. Then one morning, my boss called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Nathaniel, I'm sorry. We have to let you go. The lawsuit creates too much liability. Our corporate counsel advised us that we can't keep you on staff." I lost my job, lost my income. 3 days later, I couldn't make rent. My landlord, already suspicious from the anonymous calls, gave me 30 days to vacate. I packed my belongings into my car and moved into a cheap motel on Route 1. The kind of place that rents rooms by the week, where the sheets are thin and the walls are stained and you can hear every sound from neighboring rooms. I had gone from inheriting $12 million to living in a $40 a night motel in less than 2 months. Rachel called me on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice was tight. "Nathaniel, you need to come to my office right away. I found something." I drove there immediately, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. In her office, she spread documents across her desk. "I've been digging into your parents' background, looking for anything we can use. I found something disturbing. 6 months before Samuel died, Your parents hired a private investigator named Frank Morris. I got a partial copy of his report through Discovery. Look at this. She showed me an email exchange between Patricia and Douglas from 6 months ago. They were discussing me, discussing Samuel, discussing the inheritance. One text message made my blood run cold. It was from Patricia to Douglas, dated 8 days before Samuel died. It needs to happen soon. Nathaniel is getting too close to him. What does that mean? I whispered. Rachel's face was grim. There's another message. This one from Douglas to Patricia, 3 days before your grandfather died. Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. And Patricia's response. We're out of time. He's going to leave everything to Nathaniel. We have no choice. I felt like I was going to vomit. You think they killed him? I think we need to investigate your grandfather's death very carefully, Rachel said, because these messages suggest your parents were planning something, and the timing is too perfect. Samuel dies unexpectedly. They immediately launched this lawsuit. Every piece was already in place. She paused. Nathaniel, did your grandfather have any heart problems? No. He was healthy. That's why the heart attack was such a shock. I'm requesting his complete autopsy report and toxicology screen. If there's anything suspicious, we'll find it. She looked at me with something close to pity. I need to prepare you for what we might discover. I left her office and sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour, unable to move. The possibility that my parents had murdered Samuel to steal his money was too horrible to process. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. They had known for months that Samuel was leaving everything to me. They couldn't let that happen. So they made sure Samuel died before he could change his mind. Rachel worked fast. Within 3 days, she had Samuel's complete autopsy report and toxicology screen. We met with Dr. James Whitfield, an independent forensic pathologist she had hired for consultation. He was a man in his 60s, gray-haired and methodical, the kind of person who spoke slowly and precisely. He spread the autopsy report across the conference table in Rachel's office. The original medical examiner ruled this a natural death, myocardial infarction, heart attack, very common in men of his age. Nothing appeared suspicious at the time. But, Rachel prompted, I'm seeing some things that give me pause. Dr. Whitfield pointed to the toxicology section. Notice these elevated levels of potassium and magnesium. The original examiner attributed these to the heart attack itself. When the heart stops, cells break down and release these substances into the bloodstream. So finding elevated levels post-mortem is normal. Is there another explanation? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes. These levels can also be induced artificially. Specifically, there's a class of cardiac medications that, when given in high doses to someone not prescribed them, can trigger a heart attack that looks entirely natural. He pulled out another document. The original tox screen also found trace amounts of digoxin. Digoxin is a heart medication derived from the foxglove plant. In therapeutic doses, it helps regulate heart rhythm. In higher doses, especially in someone not taking it regularly, it can cause fatal cardiac arrhythmia. Samuel wasn't on any heart medication, I said. I would have known. I saw him every week. Dr. Whitfield nodded. The original medical examiner noted the digoxin but dismissed it as possible lab contamination. It happens sometimes. Samples get cross-contaminated during processing. But given what you've told me about the circumstances, about your parents' suspicious behavior, I think this warrants further investigation. Rachel leaned forward. Could you prove in court that this was murder? Based on this alone? No. The levels are borderline. A good defense attorney would argue natural causes. But if you can establish means and opportunity, if you can show that someone with access to cardiac medications was alone with the victim shortly before death, then yes, this toxicology report becomes very compelling evidence. We needed to establish timeline and access. Rachel and I spent the next week reconstructing Samuel's final days. We pulled security footage from his gated community in Greenwich. The retirement community kept detailed logs of all visitors. We interviewed his neighbors, his housekeeper, anyone who might have seen something. The picture that emerged was damning. For years, my parents had rarely visited Samuel. The security logs showed they had visited exactly 7 times in the previous 3 years. But in the week before Samuel died, Patricia visited twice. The first visit was 5 days before his death. She stayed 30 minutes. The second visit was 3 days before he died. She was alone with him for 42 minutes. Samuel died in his sleep 2 nights later. I watched the security footage of Patricia's final visit. She arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon, driving her black Mercedes. She carried a large bag, the kind of purse briefcase hybrid that professional women use. The security guard waved her through. The camera showed her walking up to Samuel's door. He answered, looking surprised but welcoming. They went inside. 42 minutes later, she emerged. But she wasn't carrying the bag anymore. The footage clearly showed her walking to her car empty-handed. I watched it 5 times to be sure. She went in with the bag. She came out without it. Rachel subpoenaed Patricia's credit card records. 3 weeks before Samuel's death, Patricia had purchased 2 medical textbooks from Amazon. The titles were Cardiac Drugs and Mechanisms and Pharmacology for Nurses. When we dug deeper into her background, we discovered that Patricia had worked briefly at a pharmaceutical company in her 20s, right out of college, before going to law school. She would have had at least basic knowledge of medications. We had motive. We had opportunity. We had suspicious timing. We had the toxicology report. But we needed proof. We needed Patricia to incriminate herself. Rachel came up with a plan. Through a family member we trusted, we planted a false story. We let it slip that I was ready to settle the lawsuit, that the fight was destroying me and I just wanted it to be over, that I was willing to give them $4 million to make it all go away. We suggested I was weak, scared, ready to surrender. Marcus Reed, the private investigator Rachel hired, installed an audio recording device in my parents' home office. It was legally questionable at best, potentially inadmissible in court, but Rachel said we needed to know the truth first. We could worry about admissibility later. 2 days after we planted the settlement story, my parents discussed it in their home office. Marcus's recording device captured everything. I sat in Rachel's office and listened to my parents' voices through the speakers of her laptop. The audio quality was crystal clear. Patricia's voice. 4 million isn't enough. We deserve all of it. Douglas. The judge seems sympathetic to us. I think we'll win the full amount. Patricia. We should have done this years ago. The old man lasted too long. Douglas, with a cold laugh. At least it worked. Nobody suspected anything. Patricia. Digoxin is perfect. Looks just like a heart attack. All those medical shows taught me something useful. Douglas. You're sure the bag is gone? Nothing traceable? Patricia. I burned it in the fireplace that same night. Along with the gloves and the vial, there's nothing left. And even if they somehow figure it out, they can't prove anything. It's been 3 months. Any evidence in his system is long gone. The recording continued for another 8 minutes. They discussed the lawsuit, their strategy, how much they were going to spend once they won. They laughed about me living in a motel. They talked about selling Samuel's company and taking a luxury vacation to celebrate. I listened to my mother admit to murdering my grandfather, and something broke inside me. The grief was overwhelming. Samuel, the only person who had ever loved me, had been murdered by his own daughter-in-law for money, and she felt no remorse, none at all. I looked at Rachel through my tears. We take this to the police. Right now. She shook her head slowly. Nathaniel, this recording was obtained illegally. It won't be admissible in court. A judge will throw it out. I don't care. The police can investigate. They can get warrants. They can find evidence. The problem is burden of proof. In a criminal trial, they need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The forensic evidence is circumstantial. The timing is suspicious but not conclusive. Without this recording, there might not be enough for a conviction. Then what do? We use this as leverage in the civil trial. We force them to drop the lawsuit. We expose them publicly. It's not perfect justice, but it's something. I stood up, furious. That's not enough. They murdered Samuel. They should be in prison. I agree, Rachel said calmly. But I'm telling you the reality. Criminal trials are different. We could take this to the police. They could investigate for months, and ultimately decide not to press charges. Meanwhile, the civil trial continues, and we've shown our hand. Your parents will know we have the recording. They'll be more careful. They'll destroy any remaining evidence. So they just get away with it? No. We prepare for trial. We present everything we have. We let the judge and jury see who they really are. And once we win the civil case, once they've committed perjury on the stand, once everything is in the public record, then we go to the police. At that point, they'll have no choice but to investigate. I wanted to argue, but I was too exhausted, too broken. I agreed to Rachel's plan, though every fiber of my being wanted to see my parents arrested immediately. That night, I returned to my motel room and tried to sleep. At 2 a.m, I heard breaking glass. Someone was trying to get into my room. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, then armed myself with the lamp from the bedside table. The police arrived within minutes. They found signs of attempted entry but no suspect. The officer who took my report looked at me with pity. He knew who I was. Everyone in the area knew about the lawsuit by now. The next morning, I went to Rachel's office to review trial strategy. She looked pale. We have a problem. Someone broke into Marcus Reed's car last night. They stole his laptop and his backup hard drive. The recording is gone. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. How? How did they know? There's a leak somewhere. Someone is feeding information to your parents. Maybe someone at the security company. Maybe someone Marcus knows. I don't know. But they knew about the recording, and now they've destroyed the evidence. So we have nothing. We have the security footage showing your mother's suspicious visit. We have her credit card purchases. We have Dr. Whitfield's analysis. We have the circumstantial evidence. But the confession is gone. The trial was starting in 2 weeks. We had no recording, no definitive proof, just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. My parents were going to win. They were going to get away with murder. And there was nothing I could do to stop them. The morning the trial started, I put on my only suit, the navy blue one I had bought 5 years ago for job interviews. It was loose on me now, after all the weight I had lost. I looked at myself in the motel bathroom mirror and barely recognized the hollow-eyed man staring back. I was 28 years old but looked 40. The courthouse in Stamford was imposing, all granite and marble. Reporters crowded the steps. The case had attracted local media attention. Wealthy family tears itself apart over inheritance. Perfect human interest story. I pushed through them without making eye contact, refusing to answer their shouted questions. Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. Samuel's former business associates sat in the gallery, most of them clearly on my side. They knew what kind of man Samuel was. They knew my parents. But there were also cousins and extended family members who believed my parents' lies. The room felt hostile and divided. My parents arrived with their attorney, Gerald Whitmore, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit. Patricia wore a tasteful black dress and pearl necklace. Douglas wore a charcoal suit and looked appropriately somber. They were playing their roles perfectly, the grieving, victimized family members. Patricia saw me sitting at the defense table and rolled her eyes. She leaned over and whispered something to Douglas. They both smirked. Judge Harrison entered, and we all stood. He was a man in his late 50s, fit and serious-looking, with graying hair and sharp eyes. He had a reputation for being fair but strict, unwilling to tolerate nonsense in his courtroom. I had read about him during our preparation. 30 years on the bench. Former prosecutor. Decorated military veteran, though Rachel's research hadn't turned up details about his service. He took his seat and began reviewing the case file. As he read, his eyes flicked up to me, then back to the file, then to me again. His expression changed from neutral to puzzled. He stared at me for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then he looked at the file again, reading more carefully. Finally he spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Torres, approach the bench, please." Both attorneys walked to the sidebar. Judge Harrison leaned forward, speaking quietly, but I could hear some of it. Counselors, I need to clarify something. The defendant in this case, Nathaniel, he's the grandson? The one who received the inheritance? That's correct, Your Honor, Whitmore confirmed, sounding confused by the question. Judge Harrison stared at me again. His face showed genuine shock. And the plaintiffs are his parents, suing to overturn the will? Yes, Your Honor. The judge shook his head slightly, as if trying to reconcile something in his mind. Give me a moment. He called for a brief recess and requested to see me privately in his chambers. Rachel came with me. My parents and Whitmore protested loudly, claiming it was improper ex parte communication. Judge Harrison overruled them with unusual firmness. In his chambers, a wood-paneled office lined with law books, Judge Harrison stared at me intensely. I need to ask you something. It's personal, and you don't have to answer, but I need to know. Did you serve in the military? The question caught me completely off guard. I hadn't mentioned my military service to anyone during this entire ordeal. It wasn't relevant to the case. Yes, sir. Marine Corps. His face changed. Recognition and something else. Respect. Afghanistan? 2017 to 2019? My throat went tight. Yes, sir. Camp Leatherneck? 2nd Battalion? 7th Marines? I could barely breathe. Yes, sir. How did you know? Judge Harrison stood up. Because I was your company commander, Captain James Harrison. I didn't recognize you at first. You look different, older, thinner. But when I saw your face in that courtroom, something clicked. He extended his hand. It's good to see you, Nathaniel, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I shook his hand, stunned. Rachel looked between us, confused. Your Honor, I don't understand. Judge Harrison turned to her. Your client saved 7 men during an ambush outside Sangin in 2018. We were on a convoy mission. 3 vehicles hit IEDs. We came under heavy fire from Taliban fighters in the surrounding buildings. Multiple casualties. Chaos. Men trapped in burning vehicles. He looked at me. Nathaniel ran into the kill zone 7 separate times. Pulled out wounded Marines while rounds were hitting all around him. Got shot twice himself but kept going back. Dragged men 3 times his size to safety. Kept going until he physically collapsed from blood loss. Spent 2 months in the hospital at Landstuhl. Received the Silver Star for valor. Rachel was staring at me with her mouth open. You never told me any of this. I shrugged uncomfortably. It wasn't relevant. Not relevant? Judge Harrison looked incredulous. Nathaniel, this speaks directly to your character. The entire basis of the plaintiff's case is that you're a manipulative, selfish person who would exploit an elderly man. That narrative doesn't fit with a decorated war hero. I don't like talking about it, I said quietly. It was a long time ago. Those men deserved to be saved. I just did what anyone would do. No, Judge Harrison said firmly. Most people would have stayed in cover. You risked your life 7 times. That's not something anyone would do. That's extraordinary courage and selflessness. He looked at Rachel. Counselor, I need to disclose this information in open court. It's relevant to the defendant's character, and the jury deserves to know. But I can only do it with Nathaniel's permission. I felt trapped. I had kept my military service private for years. The combat, the wounds, the nightmares. I didn't want to be defined by it. Didn't want people looking at me differently. The war was something I had survived and moved past. Or tried to. But Rachel was nodding urgently. Nathaniel, this changes everything. The jury thinks you're a con artist. They need to know who you really are. It feels wrong, I said, using that to win a legal case. Those Marines I pulled out, that had nothing to do with Samuel or the inheritance. Judge Harrison spoke gently. I understand. But your parents are painting a false picture of you. They're claiming you lack integrity, that you're capable of manipulating and exploiting others. Your military service directly refutes that claim. It shows who you really are when everything is on the line. It matters, Nathaniel. I thought about Samuel. about how he would have wanted me to fight back, about the truth mattering more than pride. Finally, I nodded. Okay. We returned to the courtroom. The tension was palpable. Everyone could sense something had changed. Judge Harrison addressed the court formally. Before we proceed, I must make a disclosure. I have a personal connection with the defendant that I was not aware of until today. I served with Mr. Nathaniel in Afghanistan. I did not recognize him when this case was assigned to me, and only realized the connection this morning. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Whitmore jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial. We request you recuse yourself. Denied. The connection does not create bias. However, in the interest of transparency, I will share the relevant facts. He described my military service in straightforward factual terms. The ambush, the rescues, the Silver Star. He spoke without emotion, sticking to the official record. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Jurors were sitting up straighter, looking at me differently. My parents looked panicked. They had no idea. In 28 years, they had never once asked about my life, my service, my experiences. They didn't know their own son was a decorated war hero. Whitmore tried to object again, claiming the information was prejudicial and irrelevant. Judge Harrison shut him down. It's a matter of public record. The citation is available online. I'm simply correcting the incomplete picture that has been presented. Mr. Nathaniel's character is directly at issue in this case. The jury deserves complete information. Rachel stood. Your Honor, in light of this new information, I'd like to call a rebuttal witness. Granted. Marcus Reed took the stand. Rachel had called him to establish additional context. Marcus also served in the Marines. Different unit but overlapping time frame. He testified about Nathaniel's reputation within the military community. Known for integrity, selflessness, courage. This is not a man who manipulates vulnerable people for personal gain. This is someone who risks everything for others. Rachel then entered my complete military record into evidence. 4 years of exemplary service. Multiple commendations. Letters of recommendation from superior officers. One letter from a retired general who wrote, In 38 years of service, I never met a finer Marine. Nathaniel represents the best of what we are. The impact was immediate and obvious. Jurors who had looked at me with suspicion now looked with respect. My parents' entire narrative was crumbling. Whitmore tried to minimize it during his cross-examination. Military service, however commendable, doesn't prove Mr. Nathaniel didn't manipulate his grandfather. But the argument sounded hollow. The jury wasn't buying it anymore. Rachel had one more piece of evidence. She presented security footage from Samuel's assisted living community. Not assisted living in the medical sense, just a gated retirement community for active seniors. The footage showed visitor logs spanning Samuel's final 6 months. Nathaniel visited 83 times, sometimes twice a week. My parents visited twice total, both visits in the week before Samuel died. Rachel also had testimony from Samuel's secretary, his business partners, his neighbors. All of them described a sharp, mentally competent man who loved his grandson and had clear reasons for his will. The medical evidence of dementia was looking more and more like the fraud it was. Then Rachel played her master stroke. She had subpoenaed footage from the pharmacy. The same pharmacy where Patricia had purchased the medical textbooks. The footage showed Patricia entering the pharmacy 3 days before Samuel died. She approached the prescription counter. 15 minutes later, she left with a small white bag. Rachel had also subpoenaed pharmacy records. They showed that Patricia had filled a prescription for digoxin, 250 tablets. The prescription was supposedly written for her mother, Helen Morrison. But Helen Morrison had died 4 years earlier. Patricia had used a dead woman's name to obtain cardiac medication that she had no legitimate need for. When Rachel presented this evidence, the courtroom went silent. Even Whitmore looked shaken. Judge Harrison's face was grim. Miss Torres, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting, Your Honor, that the plaintiffs had both motive and means to harm Samuel Morrison. I'm suggesting that his death 3 days after Patricia obtained fraudulent cardiac medication is deeply suspicious. I'm suggesting this case is not about a disputed inheritance. It's about murder. Whitmore exploded. Objection. This is outrageous speculation. There's no proof of any crime, but Judge Harrison was studying the evidence carefully. The pharmacy footage. The fraudulent prescription. Patricia's suspicious visit to Samuel. The timing. He looked at Patricia and Douglas with something close to disgust. I'm going to order a brief recess while I review this evidence. Bailiff, please ensure the plaintiffs remain in the courtroom. During the recess, police officers appeared. Judge Harrison had contacted them directly. When we reconvened, there were uniformed officers standing at the back of the courtroom. Judge Harrison addressed Patricia and Douglas directly. Based on the evidence presented, I'm halting this trial. The matter is being turned over to the Stamford Police Department for criminal investigation. Officers, please take the plaintiffs into custody. Patricia screamed. Douglas tried to stay calm, but his hands were shaking. Police officers handcuffed them both, while reporters frantically took photos. Whitmore was arguing procedure, but Judge Harrison wasn't listening. He was staring at Patricia with undisguised contempt. As my mother was led away in handcuffs, she turned and looked at me with pure hatred. "You ungrateful bastard," she spat. "We should have gotten rid of you years ago." It wasn't the confession we needed, but it was close enough. The judge heard it, the jury heard it, the reporters heard it, and most importantly, the police heard it. The courtroom emptied slowly, everyone stunned by what had just happened. I sat at the defense table, unable to move. Rachel put her hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Nathaniel. You won." But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief. My grandfather was still dead. My parents were murderers. My family was destroyed. Even knowing the truth, even having justice, it hurt. The police investigation moved quickly. With the pharmacy records, the security footage, Patricia's angry outburst in court, and Dr. Whitfield's forensic analysis, they had enough for arrests. Patricia and Douglas were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of fraud. The bail was set at $5 million each. They couldn't make it. Their assets were frozen pending the criminal trial. They spent the next 8 months in county jail, waiting for trial. The civil lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Judge Harrison ruled that the entire case had been brought in bad faith, that the evidence showed premeditation not just for murder, but for the fraudulent lawsuit itself. He ordered my parents to pay all of Rachel's legal fees, plus punitive damages. The inheritance freeze was lifted immediately. I finally had access to what Samuel had left me. The extended family members who had believed my parents started reaching out. Apologies poured in. Aunt Martha came to my motel room crying, saying she was ashamed of how she had treated me. Cousins sent long emails explaining they had been manipulated. I forgave them because holding grudges takes energy I didn't have, but I also maintained distance. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Carolyn was different. She came to see me 2 days after the arrests. She looked destroyed, her eyes red from crying. "I had no idea," she said. "I thought you were the bad guy. I thought Mom and Dad were the victims. I'm so sorry, Nathaniel. I should have known better. I should have questioned their story." We sat in my depressing motel room and talked for 3 hours. She told me about her own experiences growing up as the golden child, how the constant attention came with impossible expectations, how she was never allowed to fail or show weakness, how she realized now that our parents were incapable of real love. They only valued what people could do for them, how they made them look. I forgave my sister. She was a victim too, in a different way. We agreed to rebuild our relationship slowly, with honesty and patience. The criminal trial happened 8 months later. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Rachel beside me. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The pharmacy fraud, the security footage, Dr. Whitfield's testimony about the digoxin, text messages between Patricia and Douglas planning everything, their elaborate scheme to steal the inheritance through a fraudulent lawsuit. The paid witnesses who had lied in the civil trial were now facing perjury charges. They all took plea deals and testified against my parents. The corrupt doctor who had falsified Samuel's medical records lost his license and faced criminal charges too. Everyone involved in the conspiracy was going down. My parents' defense was weak. They tried to claim everything was circumstantial, that the digoxin prescription was for a friend who was embarrassed to get it herself, that the timing was coincidental, that the security footage proved nothing. But the jury didn't believe them. How could they? The evidence was overwhelming. The most damning testimony came from Samuel's housekeeper, a woman named Rosa who had worked for him for 15 years. She described Patricia's visit 3 days before Samuel died, how Patricia had insisted on being alone with Samuel, how she had made Samuel a cup of tea, how Samuel had been fine before Patricia arrived, but seemed tired and unwell afterward. Rosa thought he might be getting a cold. He died in his sleep 2 nights later. The prosecution's theory was that Patricia had dissolved digoxin tablets in Samuel's tea, a large enough dose to trigger a heart attack, but not so large that it would be immediately obvious. In an elderly man with no history of heart problems, it would look like natural causes, and it almost worked. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, multiple other charges. The courtroom was packed for the verdict. I watched my parents' faces as the forewoman read each guilty verdict. Patricia kept her expression blank, but I saw her hands trembling. Douglas closed his eyes, his face gray. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Harrison, back in his familiar role, handed down the maximum. Patricia received 25 years to life. Douglas received 20 years to life as an accessory and co-conspirator. Both would be eligible for parole eventually, but given their ages, 58 and 60 respectively, they would likely die in prison. The judge's statement was harsh and direct. You murdered a decent man for money. You fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, and exploited the legal system. You showed no remorse, no humanity, no recognition of your crimes. The law requires I consider factors in mitigation. I find none. You deserve every day of these sentences. I sat in the courtroom and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. Justice had been served, but Samuel was still gone. After the sentencing, I drove to Greenwich and stood in front of Samuel's house, my house now. It was a beautiful colonial with white columns and a wide front porch. The lawn was perfectly maintained by the landscaping service. It looked like a home where happy families lived. I unlocked the door and walked through rooms filled with memories. Samuel's study was exactly as he left it. Books on construction and architecture, photos of job sites, and on his desk, I found something that made me break down completely. A photo album. Not just any album. This one was filled with pictures of me. Every school photo from kindergarten through high school. My boarding school graduation. My Marine Corps boot camp graduation photo. A newspaper clipping about the Silver Star, yellowed with age. Photos Samuel had taken of us at construction sites. Birthday cards I had sent him over the years, carefully preserved. On the inside cover, in Samuel's handwriting, my grandson Nathaniel, my greatest achievement. I sat on the floor of his study and cried. Samuel had been collecting these memories my entire life. He had been proud of me in ways my parents never were. He had loved me unconditionally, and I never got to thank him properly. Never got to tell him how much he meant to me. Over the next few months, I slowly rebuilt my life. I moved into Samuel's house, but made it my own. Hired Rachel to help establish proper legal control of the construction company. Met with employees, many of whom remembered me from childhood visits with Samuel. The company was struggling a bit. Samuel's death had created uncertainty. Some clients had moved to competitors, but the core team was solid, loyal, and skilled. I promoted several longtime employees to management positions. Implemented new policies. Higher wages, better benefits, profit, sharing. Within 6 months, the company was thriving again. We secured 3 major contracts, including a sustainable housing development that Samuel would have loved. I used some of the inheritance to establish the Samuel Morrison Foundation. It provided scholarships for kids from difficult family situations. Kids like I had been. Kids who needed someone to believe in them. The foundation also funded programs for foster children, mentorship initiatives, and support for families in crisis. It was what Samuel would have wanted. I sold my parents' house in Fairfield. The proceeds, $3.2 million, went entirely to veterans' charities. Organizations supporting wounded warriors, PTSD treatment programs, transitional housing for veterans experiencing homelessness. My parents had cared only about accumulating wealth. I wanted to use it for good. My personal life improved too. A year after the trial, I met someone. Her name was Emily, and she worked at a Veterans Resource Center in New Haven. She knew about my past, had actually read news coverage of the trial. But she saw past all of that, saw the person I actually was. We dated for 18 months before I proposed. She said yes. Our wedding was small and intimate, just close friends, Carolyn, and Judge Harrison, who had become a friend and mentor. Carolyn and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. She had started therapy to process what our parents had done. She left her corporate marketing job and went back to school for social work. Now she works with troubled families, helping identify abuse and neglect. She says she never wants another child to experience what we experienced. We have dinner together every month. We visit Samuel's grave together on his birthday. 5 years after Samuel's death, the construction company has doubled in size. We employ 170 people. We're known for integrity, quality work, and treating employees well. We build affordable housing, schools, community centers, projects that make a difference. I make excellent money but live simply. The wealth doesn't define me, the work does. I hired several veterans to work at the company, gave them good jobs, training, stability. One of them, a former Army sergeant named David, became my closest friend. We never talk about combat unless we need to. But knowing he understands, that he's been there, makes a difference. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood alone. Samuel taught me that. He showed me more love as a grandfather than my parents ever did. Real family shows up. Real family cares. Real family loves you for who you are, not what you can give them. I think about the Marines I pulled out of those burning vehicles in Afghanistan. 7 men who went home to their families because I ran into fire 7 times. At the time, I didn't think about it. Didn't consider the risk. I just knew they needed help and I could provide it. That's who I am. Someone who helps when help is needed. My parents never knew me. Never bothered to find out. They assumed I was weak, that I could be manipulated and controlled. They rolled their eyes when I walked into that courtroom because they thought I was nothing. But Judge Harrison saw the truth. He saw the Marine who ran into fire to save others. And that truth destroyed their lies. Samuel knew who I was too. That's why he left me everything. Not because of what I could do for him, but because of who I had become despite my parents. He wanted me to have resources, to do good in the world, to build something meaningful, to help others the way he helped me. I'm doing that now. Every day. And I know Samuel would be proud. Standing in Samuel's study, now my study, I often think about the journey from that courtroom moment to where I am now. The weight of what happened will never fully leave me. My parents are in prison, serving their sentences for murdering the man who loved me more than they ever could. That's not something you just get over. But I've learned something important through all of this. Your worth isn't determined by the people who should love you but don't. It's determined by how you treat others, especially when there's nothing to gain. Samuel taught me that. The Marines I served with taught me that. Every person who stood by me when I had nothing taught me that. The construction company continues to grow. Last month, we broke ground on a community center in a low-income neighborhood in Bridgeport. It'll have after-school programs, job training, mental health services. Samuel always believed that construction wasn't just about buildings. It was about creating spaces where people could thrive. I'm carrying on that philosophy. The foundation has awarded scholarships to 47 students so far. Kids from foster care, from broken homes, from situations where nobody believed in them. I meet with each scholarship recipient personally. I tell them about Samuel, about how one person believing in you can change everything. Some of them cry. I understand why. Emily and I are talking about starting a family. The idea terrifies me. What if I'm like my parents? What if I don't know how to love a child properly? Emily reminds me gently that the fact I'm worried about it proves I'm nothing like them. She's probably right. Still, I'm taking my time with this decision. If we do have children, I want to be ready. I want to be the father I never had. Carolyn got married last year to a teacher named Brian. He's a good man, patient and kind. They're talking about adoption. Carolyn says she wants to give a child the love we never received. I think she'll be an amazing mother. I still see Judge Harrison occasionally. We have lunch every few months, talk about life and work and the state of the world. He never brings up Afghanistan unless I do. He understands that some things are too heavy to carry in casual conversation. But knowing he was there, knowing he saw what happened, creates a bond that doesn't need words. The company now employs 11 veterans. We have a formal hiring program, partnering with veterans organizations to provide job training and placement. Several of them had been struggling before they came to us. Now they're thriving, building careers, supporting families. That matters more than any profit margin. I think about the text message my mother sent my father. It needs to happen soon. Those 5 words set everything in motion. They murdered Samuel, tried to steal his legacy, and almost succeeded. If Judge Harrison hadn't recognized me, if my military service hadn't come to light, I might have lost everything. The jury might have believed their lies. But the truth came out. It always does, eventually. Maybe not as dramatically as it did in that courtroom, but justice has a way of prevailing if you fight long enough. The key is not giving up, even when everything looks hopeless. I've forgiven my extended family members, who believed my parents initially. They were manipulated by skilled liars. But I've also learned to maintain boundaries. Forgiveness doesn't mean blind trust. Some relationships can't be fully repaired, and that's okay. The hardest part is forgiving myself. For not seeing what my parents were capable of. For not protecting Samuel. Logically, I know I couldn't have known. Nobody suspected anything, but the guilt lingers. I should have been there more. Should have insisted he get a security system. Should have done something. Emily tells me this guilt isn't helpful. That I can't change the past, only honor Samuel's memory by living the life he wanted for me. She's right, but letting go is hard. Last week, I visited my parents in prison. First time since their conviction. I don't know why I went. Maybe for closure. Maybe to see if they felt any remorse. Patricia refused to see me. Douglas agreed. We sat across from each other in the visiting room, separated by plexiglass. He looked old. Gray hair, deep wrinkles, hollow eyes. Prison had aged him 10 years and 5. He picked up the phone on his side. I picked up mine. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was quiet, defeated. "Why did you do it?" I asked. The question I'd been carrying for 5 years. Was it really just about the money? He was silent for a long time. Finally, "Your mother wanted the money. I wanted, I don't know, validation maybe. Proof that I mattered to him more than you did. We spent our whole lives building careers, building status. We thought that's what mattered. And then he left everything to you." It felt like a rejection, like he was saying we were worthless. "So, you killed him." "I didn't kill him. Patricia did. I just didn't stop her. I knew what she was planning and I didn't stop her." He looked at his hands. "That makes me just as guilty. Do you regret it?" He looked at me through the glass. "I regret getting caught. I regret losing everything. Do I regret what happened to Samuel? Honestly, I don't know. He should have left the money to his son. That was the right thing to do." I stood up. There was no remorse, no real understanding of what they had done. My father was still focused on what he deserved, what he had lost. He couldn't see past his own ego to the actual crime. "Goodbye, Douglas," I said. "Not Dad. Never again." I walked out and never looked back. That visit taught me something important. Some people are incapable of change. They'll justify anything to protect their self-image. My parents will die in prison believing they were victims, that the world treated them unfairly. There's no fixing that. All I can do is make sure I never become like them. The greatest inheritance Samuel gave me wasn't money. It was a model of how to live with integrity, how to value people over profit, how to build something that matters. Every decision I make now, I ask myself, would this make Samuel proud? That's my compass. I'm 33 now, 5 years older than when this all started. I look at photos from that time and barely recognize myself. I was so thin, so broken, so desperate. Now I'm healthy, strong, at peace. The company made $8.4 million in profit last year. I took a modest salary and put the rest back into the business and the foundation. Money doesn't mean what I thought it would. It's just a tool. What matters is how you use it. I commissioned a statue of Samuel for the company headquarters. Bronze, 8 feet tall, showing him in his work clothes holding blueprints. The inscription reads, Samuel Morrison, builder, mentor, friend. He taught us that true wealth is measured in the lives we touch. We unveiled it on what would have been his 87th birthday. Half the company cried. Sometimes late at night, I walk through the house and feel Samuel's presence. Not in a supernatural way, just in the memories embedded in every room. The kitchen where he taught me to make coffee, the way construction workers like it, strong enough to strip paint. The porch where we sat and talked about life. The study where he showed me how to read blueprints. I've added my own memories now. Dinners with Emily, game nights with friends, plans for the future. The house is becoming ours while still honoring what it was. That feels right. Moving forward, while remembering where you came from. If I could go back and change things, I would. I'd save Samuel somehow. Find a way to expose my parents before they could hurt him. But life doesn't work that way. We can only move forward with what we know now, trying to do better, trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage. The most important lesson I've learned is this. Character is proven in adversity. Anyone can be good when life is easy. The real test comes when everything falls apart, when you're living in a motel room with nothing, when the people who should love you are trying to destroy you. Do you compromise your values? Do you become bitter and vengeful? Or do you hold on to integrity even when it costs you everything? I chose integrity, not because I'm special, but because Samuel taught me that's the only choice worth making. And in the end, that integrity saved me. Judge Harrison recognized it. The jury saw it. The truth prevailed because I refused to sink to my parents' level. I hope anyone listening to this who's going through something similar takes comfort in that. The people who betray you, who try to tear you down, who choose greed over love, they don't win. Not in the long run. Justice might take time. You might lose everything before you win anything. But if you hold on to truth and integrity, if you refuse to compromise who you are, you'll survive. You'll rebuild. You'll thrive. And the people who tried to destroy you, they'll face consequences. Maybe not as dramatically as a murder conviction, but karma is real. People who live without integrity eventually face the results of their choices. Samuel used to say that a life well lived is the best revenge. He was right. My parents are in prison. I'm running a successful company, helping people, building a family, creating a legacy. Who won? The answer is obvious. To anyone out there dealing with family betrayal, with people who should love you but hurt you instead, with injustice that seems insurmountable, keep fighting. Document everything. Tell the truth. Find people who believe in you. Don't give up. The road is long and brutal, but there is an end. There is justice. There is peace. I found mine. You can find yours. Samuel, if you're listening somehow, I hope I've made you proud. I'm using what you gave me to build something good, something that helps people, something that matters. That's what you wanted. That's what I'm doing. Every single day. Thank you for believing in me when nobody else did. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. Thank you for teaching me that integrity matters more than wealth, that character is everything, that real success is measured in the lives you touch. I'll carry those lessons until my last breath, and I'll pass them on to the next generation. Your legacy lives on, not just in buildings and businesses, but in the values you taught me, in the person I became because of you. That's the inheritance that truly matters, and nobody can ever take it away. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up against family members who betrayed you? Have you faced injustice that seemed impossible to overcome? How did you find the strength to keep fighting? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling right now. If this story touched you, if it gave you hope or strength or just reminded you that justice is possible, please hit that like button. It helps others find this story when they need it most. And subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming adversity, about choosing integrity over convenience, about building a life that matters despite the obstacles. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that truth prevails, that character matters, that holding on to your values is always worth it. Your share might reach someone at their lowest point and give them the courage to keep going. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope your journey, whatever it is, leads you to peace and justice and a life you're proud of. Take care of yourselves, hold on to what matters, and never, ever give up.